Alright, so in this part of the demo, I'm gonna show you how a typical user would access their external expense management system, pull out the data they need to get into Dynamics, and how that's processed in Dynamics. And we will see that it gets assigned to projects, resources, and a lot of other cool stuff. So for this particular demo, I'm using Expensify, but the connector can actually be used with any external expense management system, as long as they either have an API or can provide some kind of CSV extract of the transactions in there. So I'm now in Expensify. So here I'll just go to my submitted reports, and in this case I want to import both of these reports that are fully approved. And in Expensify, I've already configured it, so it provides a specific export format for our connector. So I'm going to select that and say save as. Let's call it Expensify. So that's now saved to my local hard drive. Now back in Dynamics, I'm now going to use the Expense Connect plugin to import this file. And for Expense Connect, everything is in the Project Management and Accounting module. So to import it, I'm going to go to Periodic. And in here, you can see we now have an Expense Connect tab, where we can import and we can also process expense transactions. So let's start off with doing the import. I'm going to select that file, Expensify, upload it, and select OK. And now that it's imported, the transactions from the file will go into a staging area, where we can also do a bit of error handling and potentially correct the transactions in case there's some mappings or some data that's missing. So back to the project module, and then under inquiries and reports, we have the Expense Connect area, where I can access the imported expense transactions. There we go. So these are now all of my transactions from Expensify. And we can see that the import status is imported. If they're successfully processed, the status will go into processed. And if there's any errors, then the status will go into error. So pretty straightforward. Then the next step is for us to actually process the transactions. So back to Periodic, I'm going to select Process Expense Transactions, and this could just be set up as a batch job, so that the users actually don't need to do this. I'm going to select OK. And what this does is that it takes the expense transactions and it transfers them to an expense journal. And then all of the underlying mapping rules that we have configured in Dynamics, it will apply that to those transactions. And if we go to the expense journals, look, then we'll see how that looks like. So we can now see that it's created an expense journal here. It's even put in the earliest transaction date and the latest transaction date. And via the configuration, it's actually using a configured journal. Then if we open up the lines, then here you can see that all of our expense transactions are here. And if you look at the amount, that actually correlates to these two submitted reports totaled up. And if we just go through this one by one, then you can see the first line here. It's been mapped to the categories, the correct resource. We're bringing in the description and the cost price. The system is also calculating a sales price based on standard Dynamics setup. And we're also able to identify whether or not it's a billable or non-billable transaction based on the information we're getting from the expense system. And last but not least, we're also able to identify if it's a reimbursable transaction, and if it is, then the offset account type is a vendor, and if it's not reimbursable, then the offset account obviously just becomes a standard ledger account. If it's a reimbursable transaction, then the system is actually using the expense receipt ID as the invoice number. So yeah, and then from here it's just following the standard Dynamics process. So if the company has workflows tied into this journal, then they will have to submit that before they post it. If not, then this journal just needs to be reviewed and posted by a controller or accountant.